All right, current Herle Burlyites, it's a big day. Welcome to the premiere episode of our brand new podcast. It's Curse of Politics, starring the Herle Burly Political Panel. That's me and those crafters of brilliant campaign strategies and utterers of vivid expletives, Jenni, Byrne, and Scott Reid. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Curse of Politics wherever you get your podcasts. When you do, you'll be able to boast to your friends. Have you got the curse? Why not? I've got the curse, and it's goddamn great. I want to be really clear about this. The Herle Burly Interview Podcast is still a show. We'll be dropping a new episode weekly. But here's the important thing to know about Curse of Politics. First of all, during the writ period, we will have a special on the day the writ is called. And then following that, we will be 5 days a week, every morning in your inbox by 8 a.m. with both a news roundup, the latest overnight polling from Ecos Research, and Jenni, Scott, and my analysis of the campaign at that point. Don't miss Curse of Politics every day during the writ period. All right, we've got an election speculation show on tap for you today, chock full of all the rumors we've heard from all our friends in the highest and lowest places. Let's see, I'm not in the prediction business, but the writ's going to drop sometime in the next 48 to 144 hours. We'll talk about campaign kickoffs and share some of our own war stories. Plus, it's a lonely existence on the Liberal backbenches. Amos is out, Vaughan is out, McCrimmon is out. We'll discuss those latest members of the Liberal class of 15 not running this time around. And if there's time, we'll even chat about why Jay-Z and Beyonce were on the Obama 60th birthday invitation list, and Jenni Byrne wasn't. And don't forget to stick around for our Hey Yous to close out today's curse. Jenni, Scott, God damn it, you two. It's our own show. How does it feel?
Oh, it feels great. It's very exciting.
The Curse of Politics. I love it. It sounds like a universal horror film. We expect Lon Chaney Jr. to show up as Chrétien. I must get the vote. Abbott and Costello, Meet the Monster was on the other night. The Curse, Meet Frankenstein was on the other night, and it was Lon Chaney Jr. turns to turns to Lou Costello and says, "But you don't understand. When the moon is full, I become a wolf." He's like, "Yeah, you and every other guy on shore leave." Fuck, I love Lou Costello.
Oh, you can't beat a line like that. Hey, Scott.
Yes, sir.
Did you just celebrate your mother's birthday?
We haven't celebrated it. It just was, we're going to celebrate it on Saturday. So this is an appeal to the Prime Minister. Please, Friday is not great, but okay. Sunday, better, probably ideal. Saturday, don't. Not like don't rain on, don't be raining on Judy's parade. We've got the cousins. We've got all the old friends coming, yeah. So my mother turned 75. She turned 75 last Sunday. We're going to have a party on Saturday. She's opposed to all of it. She's opposed to aging. She's opposed to recognizing her age, and she's opposed to having people gather and speak with her. But we're going to make it all happen.
Well, happy birthday to her.
Yes, happy birthday, Scott's mom.
She will. She never listens to this. She never listens to the pod. She's no too much swearing. She doesn't. She was astonished to discover that I curse. So,
Jenni, after all the time you've spent away from Toronto, why are you in Toronto in the muggiest, most humid, awful time of the year to be in Toronto?
Well, I had to come back. Work is busy, and people are starting to meet more in person. It's a lot of as we ramp up. I know, David, I'm sorry. And as we ramp up for the election, there's just a lot of commentary and things to be done here. I'm also having my condo painted. So not only are we heading into an election, that my condo is a disaster because it's about to be painted. So anyways, I'm unfortunately back, but I am looking forward to the election. And I think it's going to end up being on the Sunday because I do not see why the Liberals would want to have more than 36 days. As we've talked about, 36 days, not 1 minute longer if I were them. And I think if I were them, I'd be regretting not calling it last week or the week before or a month ago.
Man, testify.
Yeah, can you think of why they haven't, Jenni? Can you think of why they haven't?
Well, they obviously want to get some announcements out the door. They're continuing doing the childcare announcements. They with the provinces. They did Quebec last week. There's like a ton of rumors. They've signed one with an Ontario, and they're going to announce this week sometime. So I think they wanted to get some last minute government announcements out the door. I don't think they should have, but I think that's what they were thinking.
Do you think? Do you guys think? Because this is a kind of according to Hoyle, add water and stir sort of formula that governments have used forever. So, use the power of government in that short ramp up period to the campaign, do a ton of local announcements, demonstrate that you're not just campaigning on things, but that you've done things. I mean, I'm the guy that was urging them to get those childcare deals done because I thought they had that fallow period after the budget. But do you think this stuff accretes value for the writ period? Because I don't.
No, I don't think so.
Well, listening to the New Democrats on my panel this week, which will be out tomorrow on the Herle Burly, made me think a little bit differently about this. I mean, their critique of the government is so centered on you can't trust Liberals. You can't trust Liberals to do what they say. And they promised, like they're still saying they've promised childcare. They're still using that line that they've promised childcare for 30 years and never delivered it. And it made me think that maybe the Liberals were wanting to sign up the whole country on childcare just to defeat that argument, just so that was not even a plausible thing to say.
No, but to be fair to the NDP, you guys have signed deals with provinces before and it's never gone forward. I just don't think people care.
Because you killed them. Because of you.
It's like saying Professor Plum isn't
not
around.
Because of me, because of you.
Oh.
Professor Plum, that bum, he's never teaching. It's because you guys strangled him in the library. Fuck. But
in fairness,
I haven't heard the conversation with the NDP. But the only thing I would say about that is I think it may be really nose to the window pane, too close to it. The other thing is that, from my perspective, like I don't know how much of an antidote actually the childcare deals provide to that, because the NDP will say that they're not done. It's not like people actually are walking into a childcare space, so they're not going to see the physical examination presence of it. So, the government will be able to say, no, we've signed, actual real deals with multiple provinces. I'm not sure. They're still going to have an argument over whether that's real or it's not. I mean, I suppose that the NDP want to have that argument. But the fundamental critique isn't situational. It's not analytical. Like, if that's the critique, that's always the NDP critique of the NDP. So the Liberals, I should say. That's always the NDP bash on the Liberals, which, you can't trust them. And, like, I don't know. Is that effective in this moment? Or if something is your eternal talking point, I just question whether it has, real sandpaper value in the current circumstance. I'm not sure they're going to get very far in that argument. I think they're going to win seats away from the Liberals by being better and more attractive than the Liberals, and by the Liberals, most importantly, not being good. They have to count on the Liberals not being good, being lazy, looking smug, drifting into a campaign, and taking punches on the job without putting their hands up. That's what they have to count on. I don't think it's going to be that people are going to go, you know what, I've decided I don't trust these Liberals. They say one thing and then they don't deliver. I don't think that's going anywhere. That's just an eternal talking point for the NDP.
Well, and it was interesting. Yesterday, Singh was out and he was actually talking about debt and spending. He was talking about the fact that how are the Liberals going to pay for all the programs that they have instituted during COVID. He wasn't calling for an end to the programs. He was calling for an extension to wage subsidies, to employment subsidies. But he was actually talking about debt and spending. So it's very interesting. He actually was more strong on the issue than what we've seen O'Toole be. So it's very interesting what their numbers are saying in terms of where the issue set and where voters' minds are.
I wonder if they were using that, Jenni, to set up their argument for wealth tax and actually position themselves, interestingly, perhaps as more fiscally responsible than the Liberals, because they're prepared to raise taxes in order to offset some of this spending and try to get their wealth tax into play in the election. Very popular idea. Not going to raise a lot of money in Canada, but a very popular idea.
Yeah, it's possible.
Could interfere with your plans for renovation of the condo there, Jenni. Could raid your pocketbook. I don't know, but I also wonder whether they may just be seeing the same polling that everyone else is seeing, which is that people have this kind of latent anxiety about the level of spending. They think it's unsustainable, but that coexists in the minds of many people in the public with perhaps an even more present concern about ensuring that those programs are extended and that we don't leave ourselves short. And I don't know that it needs to set something up. Like, it may be that they're just going, I'm going to connect with you by saying 3 things that you agree with, but not every single one of them then actually manifests itself in a logical outcome. I think it's entirely possible in today's day and age to say, the Liberals, aren't delivering on this. They're not. We can't count on them to extend these wage subsidies. As soon as the election's over, they're going to be gone, and we're going to be in big trouble. And and they're spending in an unsustainable way on things that don't matter. And I columnists will point out that not all those things square. The Liberals will try to rebut that, but I don't know. I just think they get people's heads nodding, right? So I'm not sure
Jenni,
that they are setting something up.
How many of you were able to visit virtually with your doctor during COVID? How about see the results of a medical test? Or just get the treatment you or a family member needed? I'm betting it's a lot of you. Of all the ways the pandemic changed our lives, the way we access healthcare, and I'm really talking about digital health resources here, has been among the most significant. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has been leading that effort. As Canada's largest and frankly most important IT healthcare provider, TELUS Health has been investing and innovating in this area for 13 years now. This expansion stemmed directly from CEO Darren Entwistle's foresight in creating a company with a strong social purpose, something TELUS had been focused on long before the pandemic. Their mission is clear: to help transform the way Canadians experience healthcare so that everyone, no matter their socioeconomic background, has equal access to it. And when TELUS says everyone, they mean everyone, urban and rural Canadians alike. The roadmap to get this done is 5G technology. The faster we open up spectrum and implement 5G with all of its blazing speed means that all Canadians, especially those living in rural and remote communities where connectivity has been a challenge, can get on their screens, visit with their doctors, download large files of medical imagery, and get the diagnosis and treatment they need. The result is simple: better care. It's going to help kickstart our post-COVID economic recovery too. 5G technology, as applied to healthcare in Canada, will generate an additional $16 billion in GDP value over the next 20 years. TELUS is committed to working with governments at every level to get this done. And you can learn more at telus.com/health. Can I draw on your expertise in voter turnout?
Sure.
Not you.
Sorry. And banjo playing. These are my 2 foremost areas of expertise.
So the NDP have tremendous potential among young voters, under 35, but particularly under 25. Singh's numbers are really quite astonishing in that group of people. They are notoriously difficult to get out to vote. I said to the New Democrats I was talking to that in a normal election, one supporter over the age of 55 is worth 2 supporters under the age of 35, under the age of 35. And so are there tactics these days, given the way people do voter contact now and the way people get out the vote now, are there more effective ways at delivering that youth vote to the polls than used to be the case?
Well, there's a lot of, you're seeing that the NDP are trying to do that already. You've seen tremendous articles about Singh's tremendous success on the TikTok platform and other social media platforms. So I think that is that's going to be something you're going to see the NDP continue to do in terms of identifying and getting votes out there. Whether it actually works for them is going to end up being whether it's going to be another story, because we've seen even with the American election 8 months ago, the Democrats. David, we've talked about it on the show. They still were basically like, we have to get to the doors to identify votes and drag people out. That's still ultimately the most effective form of GOTV, and so that's going to be the problem for the NDP if the voter levels of the 18 to 35s, 18 to 30 stays at the same level that it has in the past, as people just don't come out in the same numbers. To your point. And so that is going to be a very interesting dynamic to see what they do. But I think there's different tactics they can do. So many people now only get their news and information from their phones. I can't remember the last time I picked up a newspaper and read it myself. So I think that they're going to employ those tactics. But I still think at the end of the day, the best way to get people out is the face-to-face contact or secondary phones. There just hasn't been. We've seen it with the American election, and they are so much higher than where any of our parties are in terms of tactics. It still became the bread and butter for them.
That makes sense.
Do you expect to find people knocking on your door this election?
Do I expect?
Yeah. Will people door knock in this election?
People are out door knocking now. Of course they're going to door knock.
I think they will. I think we have to see how. This is one of the factors that I think might shift during the campaign. Like if the Delta starts to really take off, I think it alters the trajectory of this campaign in not entirely predictable ways. And there's some broader issues we talk about there, but I think one of them on this specific is, does that mean that one of the parties around Labor Day, we'll say, for example, if cases are skyrocketing, certainly if pediatric ICUs are starting to get filled up, if people go, whoa, okay, so one of the parties go, well, we're going to actually down tools on that. And will then other parties feel like it? So I think there's some interesting, I say interesting, it's, concerning, but I think there's some question marks around this campaign because of the way the calendar is going to fall with the Delta being so unpredictable.
But so to go back to the American election, 161 million people voted, and that was at the height of the second wave. That was in November when just before we were all locked down again here in Ontario, and there was regular campaigning. Biden didn't have rallies, but his people were still out knocking on doors. The Republicans were having rallies and knocking on doors. The difference now is so many people are vaccinated. 70% here in Ontario, 60% of people are fully vaccinated. Close to 80% have one dose. I could be wrong on that, but it's an astronomical number. So I just don't see. I think it would be a mistake for any party to come out and say we're not going to door knock or we're going to scale back our campaign based on what we've seen in the past. The American election, and by this time next week, we're going to have had 5 provincial elections that have happened in the country as well. It's kind of like, Dina Hinshaw, the new chief medical officer of Ontario, came out yesterday and said the same thing. They're not seeing more lockdowns because, as the politicians and as they have said, COVID's not going away. It's never going to be COVID zero. It's just like the flu is never going away. So this is us learning how to live with this, and that includes having an election.
Yeah. One of the things, though, I presume as we get close to the start of school, that parents are going to be in a state of very high anxiety about their kids.
Yep.
And their kids' exposure. I mean, that's the big wild card here. And I just wonder how that, whether that affects whether you want people coming to your door, or whether you want strangers coming to your door or not.
It will. I hear what Jenny's saying, but I think it's entirely circumstance dependent. I mean, we can look at what happened in November in the United States, but I think if in September in Canada and in places like Ontario, in particular in BC, if we see cases rise, if we start seeing kids, the number of kids with COVID rising, I think you're going to see just an unpredictable reaction. I just think it's going to get weird, and the parties are going to have to improvise and figure out how to navigate that, balancing the need to get the job done with the need to demonstrate sensitivity to public health, and it's going to be an interesting piece of alchemy. Can I just say, I want to go back to the youth vote. Can I go back to the youth vote thing for 1 second? Because I got a question for you.
You can do whatever you want, Scott.
Excellent.
It's our show. You can do whatever you want.
Excellent. Well, all right. I assume there's some Will Amos inspired limitations on that invitation, but you guys are talking about the youth vote, and your question to Jenni, and Jenni's answer was all about how do you drag them out, which I get. But in terms of motivating them, like to actually vote, as opposed to say, oh, if I were inclined to vote, I would vote NDP disproportionately or whatever. Has there been an example in Canadian politics of a noticeable, like demonstrable uptick in youth voting other than legalizing weed? You know, and so to motivate them to say, well, I have to go to the ballot box to get this thing that I care about. And it wasn't a huge number, but it appeared to be some measurable impact. And has there ever been another example? And so what would it possibly be in this campaign that would motivate, like, I'm trying to think of my 23-year-old and my 19-year-old, like, other than their old man bugging them saying it's their civic duty, I don't know what would make them vote based on what's on offer. I just don't think. Like, Jack would vote to legalize weed. Will would campaign to legalize weed if that were in play now. But I don't know what else would get them out of bed.
I think there was more at play in 2015 than just weed. I hear you, but I think there was more at play in 2015 than just weed. I think that Trudeau had genuine celebrity status among that age cohort, and they turned out. And I think that they turned out for Obama in 2008 too. They will turn out generally for celebrities or people that have some very strong cultural cachet, as Obama did, and only for non-incumbents, only for challengers, because as soon as you govern, they didn't turn out for Obama in 2012, and they didn't come back for Trudeau in 2019. As soon as you govern, you're too compromised to purely motivate that group of people. But I will say this about Singh. It's not just that young people prefer the NDP to the other parties. In fact, there's a little bit less of that than there is about absolute favorability numbers for Singh in that cohort. So it's not just that they prefer him to the other parties. There's actual enthusiasm about him.
But David, don't NDP leaders always have high level of favorabilities? It doesn't necessarily translate into votes on any of the age groups.
No, he's an interesting pattern though. He's unusually strong, has unusually high favorables for an NDP leader, for anybody among the 18 to 35, and he has unusually low favorables among over 55, even for an NDP leader. So there's a very strong generational difference in the way people react to him. The people on the panel suggested that some of that was racism among older Canadians, and I have no doubt that exists and that that's a factor. But I also think that there's a difference in the way his communication is perceived, and I put this to them, that young people see his communication as direct, authentic, and cutting through the bullshit of politics, and that older people see his communication as light, lacking gravitas, and insubstantive.
It's possible. We're spending a lot of time talking about the NDP when really their increase, as everyone's talking about in the polls, is so insignificant. It could be seen as like margin of error based on what the last election's results are, outside of the millennial or the Generation Z cohort.
True enough. It's just one of the things.
But they may, as other commentators have been suggesting, they may have more to say about whether the Liberals win a majority than O'Toole does, though.
Yeah. That's the
it's
thing.
It's possible, but they're only about, if you look at the latest polls, they're only anywhere between 3% and 4% higher nationally than what they were in the last campaign. And there's really been no significant uptick in Ontario. Right. Where they are in BC is essentially where they were there. I think they're up in the last Nanos poll that I saw. They're only up 2% in British Columbia from where they were in the last election. So they're not significantly higher in any of the polls that we're seeing. Who is significantly higher are the Liberals. They are significantly higher almost everywhere, minus Ontario. They're a bit down in Ontario, but everywhere else they're up. Like in BC, if you look at the numbers, they're 9% higher than what they got in the 2019 campaign.
For sure. But if you're like me and you sit on the back porch and just rock back and forth and think of all the things that could go wrong, they're one of the 4 or 5 things that Liberals have to be alarmed about that could get in the way of their majority. I don't think they're the most important thing, but I think they're. I think you got to think now. I think you're obligated, if you're running the Liberal campaign, to think now about what happens if that momentum increases during the writ, particularly in the first couple weeks, and they start to sort of look like they're getting a little bit of a bounce. How do you blunt an NDP bounce? I think that's an interesting question and a scenario that the Liberals have to contemplate.
It's hot. This has been a ferocious summer, particularly out west. None of us has ever seen weather like this in Canada. In June, southern British Columbia experienced a high of just about 50 degrees Celsius. That's the average maximum summer temperature in the sand desert of Saudi Arabia, an area so pitiless it's called the empty quarter. The thing is, southern BC is not empty. It's filled with communities and First Nations through which our sponsor, CN Rail, operates trains all year long. The safety of those communities is CN's greatest priority, so it makes sense to have plans to prevent fire, particularly during periods of extreme weather. To begin with, CN tracks are filled with sensors and detectors that constantly scan cars and locomotives for hazards like overheated wheels, hot bearings, or dragging equipment. And CN's train and maintenance crews are effectively trained as first responders. They are not professional firefighters, but they have basic firefighting equipment and are instructed to remain at the scene of any fire they spot, containing it, if they can, until the professionals arrive. CN also maintains firefighting trailers at strategic points along its network, where heavier gear like pumps, hoses, and bladders are stored. During extreme weather, CN adjusts the speed of its trains. Locomotives are placed where cabooses used to be to enable forward monitoring. Extra patrols precede and follow trains, looking for any signs of fire crews may have missed. Steps are taken to remove any loose brush or debris on right-of-ways. And of course, mechanical inspections are intensified to ensure no locomotive is emitting sparks. CN's drive to be North America's safest railway continues. Well, because I think the Liberals have to assume that the Conservatives are going to rebound. I think that if I was running the Liberal campaign, I would be assuming that the Conservatives are going to regress, at least to the mean, and that we're going to see Conservative numbers 30 to 31, 32%. And so how do you win a majority against those numbers is what you need to be thinking about, not how do you win a majority against 25%, because they're not going to get 25% of the vote. They're going to get over 30% of the vote, I think.
Okay, is this crazy? Is this crazy? Arguably, you need that to happen. You need in the first 10 days of the campaign, the Conservatives to start to be creeping up so that the media story is, in these early first couple of weeks, it looks like the Conservatives are outperforming expectations. You need that if you're the Liberals in order to say, all right, all you soft Liberal NDP switchers, we're back to the traditional dynamic. And if you don't want Prime Minister O'Toole, then fucking get in line. They need that dynamic.
What I call disciplining the progressive vote.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jenni's less convinced of O'Toole's ability to haul the campaign onto his back and fighter pilot his way through the public.
Maybe, but I think he is a potential wild card in this campaign because he's got to be at the bottom of his estimation levels right now. He's got to be, however good or bad he is, he's almost got to be underestimated at this point. And I think there's a reasonable prospect that he outperforms those expectations in the campaign. And I think the Conservative campaign could outperform expectations in the campaign, in part because everything is set so low right now.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see. Well, we're going to be this time next week. We'll be into it, so we'll see kind of how they take off. As we have said, campaigns matter, and there were a lot of people that said that our floor was 30%, and we've seen with most of the national polls in the last month that that's not the case. So. To your point, David, there's only one way for the campaign to go, and that is hopefully up.
So I don't like his approach to the campaign, O'Toole, right now. I don't like this pre-positioning of Trudeau shouldn't be calling an election because of COVID. And it's an inappropriate time to call an election. First of all, it's in direct conflict with the messaging of some provincial governments in the country about what the situation is with respect to COVID. But more importantly, I think by this point, I know that what they're trying to do is they're trying to set up a week where you're skirmishing around the legitimacy of the election and whether the Liberals are craven opportunists or not. I think that happens for a couple of days regardless, but all of this pre-election communication about you shouldn't have one, aren't you missing an opportunity to be articulating why the government should be changed as opposed to effectively taking the position that the government shouldn't change? That the circumstances in the country make it all for the best that we continue to have a Liberal government. I just find that such a weak positioning for the official opposition to come into with, and I don't understand why they're not publicly chomping at the bit to replace this government with a better one.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that it makes the campaign seem scared to go into an election. It doesn't instill a lot of confidence. And it's also a message that a vast majority of people that are conservative voters and supporters fundamentally disagree with.
Presumably conservative voters are the cohort that actually most want an election, because they would be the people that would most want to see the government replaced. You also don't need to do it if you think there's any milk in it's the wrong time for an election. This demonstrates that their values aren't what they say in terms of Trudeau and the Liberals. When you know the NDP are hitting that, so you don't need to hit that if you're O'Toole. Like all you can get out of that is that it takes a shade off of the Liberals, and if it's going to work, then the NDP are uncorking that. And if it doesn't work, then you've wasted time, as you say, demonstrating the superiority of your alternative. It takes me to something I feel strongly, which is it takes me to the Liberals. And I think, launch day is always such a big deal, right? Like, it is, I joke, like, it's like New Year's Eve for political hacks, right? Like you spend all your time going, oh, New Year's Eve is going to be the greatest. We're going to work on, we're going to have a party. I'm going to be wearing this. It's going to be great. And at midnight, the horns are going to go and I'm going to kiss the most beautiful woman and all this kind of shit, right? And it's always a letdown. And launch day is kind of like that, right? Like, you put all this energy in it. But I think
especially that last part.
Yeah. Nobody kisses me. I'm off in the corner kissing videotapes. But I really think the Liberals, I think they have an opportunity to make launch day a brand new message about why this, because I don't like their positioning coming into this campaign. There's hidden this faux bullshit that probably doesn't count against them. It doesn't matter about how Parliament isn't working. It's either people aren't paying attention to it, or people are and they identify it as obviously contrived. It doesn't get you anywhere, in my view. And I just think, if I really
they don't have an example of one thing they wanted to do that they couldn't do. And you can convince yourself, well, it's all bullshit, but it doesn't matter, and you set it up, whatever. Like, I don't understand. First of all, I'm in complete agreement, and we've said this many times. I think they should have called this damn thing 3-4 weeks ago. But in addition to that, I think on launch day, I think it falls on the Liberals if they really want to set the pace. They got to say, look, we need a mandate. There's a couple of really important decisions, and I would take control of the Delta question mark in this campaign, and I would put right on the table on day one and say, the question of mandatory requirements and vaccination passports at the federal level, at the provincial level. This is a divisive question, and people have different views on this, and they argue them with passion. And it's sufficiently important as we go forward. If we have to live with COVID ad infinitum, it's sufficiently forward that I want a majority mandate behind me to say, this is what my vote is, this is where I'm going. So I would take control of that issue, and we know that that's a wedge in particular for O'Toole that will cause him trouble. And then I would obviously extend it to, and as we build an economic recovery, we got to get the right program. What is that right program? As opposed to just drifting in the campaign saying, we put together a budget and it highlighted these values and we're going to continue. And all that soft kind of just backing into a campaign. Like, I think there's
I don't think it's about calling the election now and people saying it's unnecessary. I think they can quash all of that if they come out with a sharp reason that they like, I want a mandate. I, Justin Trudeau, want a mandate to do these two things. Give it to me if you agree with me. Don't if you don't. And I will see if they do that. But my feeling is they're going to stick with this kind of, rice pudding without raisins kind of message. And I think they got to fix it.
But it seems to be working for them.
Well, we'll see. I mean, nobody's engaged, right? So, I think they're going to find that there's going to be an immediate correction in the polls, and then they'll battle back and they'll win. And they'll win a large minority or a majority. But I think that if they go in with that soft message, and if, as David says, it's inevitable that there's got to be a little momentum for the cellar-dwelling O'Tooles of the world, then you're gonna start off with 10 days of reverse momentum. I would try to fix that by saying, no, here's the sharp end of this stick and why we're having this campaign and what I want out of it. So I'm looking for that. And I really would put the question of COVID and the resurgent Delta variant right on the table up front and go, I'm not doing this 2 weeks from now when cases are rising. I'm doing it right now and saying it's part of my rationale for calling this election.
Well, they can also point to vaccines as the high rate of vaccines in terms of if they want to actually address the Delta. They can say the reason that Canada's not getting hit, cases may be rising, but people aren't being hospitalized in the numbers that they had been pre-vaccines because we were able to, albeit late, we were able to ensure that Canadians had a high level of vaccination. So they can actually point to a win. They can actually point to a win on that. But the parliament is dysfunctional. Those are Trudeau's words on that. The prepositioning on that 3 weeks ago it could have been exactly the same as if you went back and listened to Stephen Harper when we led into the 2008 campaign. Because I remember that I actually went that summer. I went to Italy for a couple of weeks for a vacation, and the moment I land, my old BlackBerry, the big BlackBerry that had the, the size of an iPad with the ball on the side, and would stay charged for a good 3.5 weeks each time you plugged it in. And I remember going to the PMO and they're like, okay, well, we've got to talk because the bosses decided we're calling the election in 2.5 weeks. So it's the reason they're going now is ultimately because it's not going to get any better for them. It was better for them a month ago, but they can do my vision versus their vision versus Aaron O'Toole versus Jagmeet Singh. But at the end of the day, they're having the election now because the chances that both from a COVID point of view and more importantly, an economic point of view, things are going to get dicier for incumbent governments. That's why they're going now.
And it didn't hurt you in 08.
Okay, I'm going to put you on this.
Played that. All I was going to say, David, is it didn't hurt you in 08. So I think liberals point to that example now. They point to that example and they say, see, this is happening. I just think it's inefficient. It doesn't do the campaign's not going to be about dysfunction in Parliament. So to me, it's just it's a waste of message space. Get to the thing that the campaign's going to be about and it has to be about if you're to succeed. Quit dicking around with this phony message. Sorry,
so Jenni, I got to put you on this. I got to put you on the spot. And
oh no,
you're not involved in this effort, and I'm not going to make you accountable in any way for it. But you do know Aaron O'Toole. Yeah. You do know Aaron O'Toole pretty well. And what could he do? What is it possible from him or the party that would change the trajectory that we expect this campaign to follow?
Well, Aaron's a smart, there's no disputing that Aaron's a very smart, he is a very smart guy. I think that the problem he has, the biggest problem he has, and we've talked about this, and I think you said you touched on with your conversation with the NDP strategist, is authenticity. So he campaigned to win a leadership race based on someone that he was not. It was someone that's not philosophically who he was. And now, so what people are seeing now is philosophically and from a policy point of view, more who Aaron is. And that's the challenge he is going to have with traditional conservative voters. The reason, why we're, anywhere between, 7 and 4 points behind nationally where we were in the last election. So I think that what he would need to do is, forget the carbon tax. You fucked up doing that. Hopefully no one will bring it up because all the other parties minus Max Maverick support some form of carbon tax, and look a little bit. You can look to the past successes and still move forward. And so I think that opportunities he has, for example, like the debate is going to be a very interesting one to watch. He's a very comfortable debater. He speaks very well. So I think that's going to be the first opportunity for Canadians really to see Aaron, beside Trudeau, beside Singh, and see what he can offer. The caveat to that, like the downside for him is if the PPC stays. What could be a downside is if the PPC stays at the numbers nationally that they're at now, it is a very likely scenario that Maxime Bernier is in the debates. And Bernier's opponent, who Bernier will go after in those debates, will not be Trudeau, will not be Singh. He will be singularly focused on going after O'Toole, in my opinion.
Which will lead him. God, that's such an interesting point, Jenni. That's such an interesting point, because that will lead him right into a strategic decision about whether he needs to win the fight with Bernier for those voters, or whether he uses Bernier's attack as an opportunity to change his impression with other voters.
Well, but I think I was back home for close to a month, up until 2 days ago, and I spoke with a fair number of people, non-political people, and in the course of the conversation, it would I had people say, I'm going to vote for that French guy this time. I'm just going to not vote Conservative this time. So Aaron's problem is going to be, yes, you need to appeal to swing voters, to the unicorn of the voters, the 905 soccer moms and what have you. But you've also got to ensure that you actually keep the people that have voted for you over the last, several elections, even the ones that you have lost. So they have a very large challenge going into that. And that's going to end up being I think, a very interesting thing to watch during the course of the campaign.
Can I add one possible further layer to that, which I don't think, Jenni, you necessarily agree with me about the prospects of how much the Delta could become a factor in the campaign. But I think people are anxious about it, and I think they're going to likely grow more anxious. And it becomes interesting if in an election, Bernier's got a bigger platform and is banging the drum, and the Delta starts rising, and cases are increasing, and people are having debate about, how worried do we need to be about this? What are the ICUs and all that? And you have that discussion happening, and then suddenly Bernier is able to wedge O'Toole because he can unapologetically argue to that small group of people that say, fuck all this. And that actually further harms O'Toole's ability to consolidate the right vote. So he may be, O'Toole's forced to say, look, everybody's got to get vaccinated. We got to be responsible with this. But O'Toole's been arguing about how it's an inappropriate time to have an election because we should be focused on public health. Then he's going to have Max arguing the other. And Max is going to find some traction there because there's more than 7% or 6% of the population that share his take on that. Now, that may not be a popular view among friends of mine, but he's got more room there, and that further runs a risk. If that issue is prominent in the campaign, it runs a risk of actually wedging O'Toole. So he's getting it from both ends. And he's got no choice. He's going to have to say, go fly a kite, public health first, but that gives Bernier some room to eat up some of his vote on that other flank.
What would you do, Scott? You've written the odd launch speech. If you're writing O'Toole's speech, what's the most important thing you want to get across? Like, what's the punch you throw?
I'll tell you the first thing I wouldn't do is I think that Conservatives consistently make the mistake of thinking that people hate Trudeau as much as they do. And I think by and large, people have made it pretty clear they're reasonably comfortable with Trudeau. They're even comfortable with his insufficiencies. I mean, if blackface taught you nothing else, it taught you that people have an enormous appetite for overlooking blemishes that would otherwise sink a political leader when it comes to Trudeau. So I wouldn't do this hardcore Trudeau's fucked everything up and he's no good and all that kind of stuff. I would go, as we've talked about before, I would try my best to define the issue around pocketbook tax issues. I would try to talk about affordability issues. And I would say, look, we are the people that can best manage that. It seems to me that if some of the polling has been ambiguous about who people trust the most to handle the economy, there's been polling even that's shown that the Liberals were ahead on that. I don't think you can have success in a general election if you're a conservative, if you don't at least reclaim that territory. So I would focus on, look, we've got to figure out how we make this economy work at a lunch bucket level. And I think I would go hard on those affordability issues. And I wouldn't, by the way, be freaked out about having perfect remedies to everything. I think there's lots of room for an opposition leader right now to say, I'm going to be bringing forward, here's the kind of things I'm focusing on. But I would get the critique sank first. Get people nodding their heads and saying, yeah, you're fucking right. I am worried about the cost of things. And I am worried about whether or not my kid can ever own a home. And I am worried about where things are headed and how we're going to finally reconcile all this. I would hammer hard on that stuff. That if you can do that on day one.
What's the proof point that Trudeau doesn't? What's the proof point, either one of you? What's the proof point that Trudeau doesn't care about cost of living? Doesn't care about that? How are you gonna pin this on Trudeau?
Well, I think you're talking about the high level of debt that the country has assumed, simply because, and now that we've talked about this, you've seen the price of lumber has skyrocketed, the price of certain foods have skyrocketed. Look at the price of meat. If you go in and buy steak or buy even a box of burgers for the barbecue, it's astronomically higher. You can't buy a box of burgers that are $15 now, which is so much higher than what it is. So what you're going to go after Trudeau on is the fact that what is the plan to deal with Canada's debt? Because right now it's affecting cost of living through inflation, which eventually will go to the increase of interest rates, which could actually make people that are not going to be able to afford the homes they live in. If interest rates increase, if you're a 40-year-old, a couple that lives in Oakville and they have a $1.5 million mortgage, and interest rates go from the 1.5% that it's at now up to 4 or 5%, that could actually mean you can't make your payments. You can't make your mortgage payments. And so if I'm the conservative,
interest rates are so huge. Interest rates are so huge. When Paul was in finance, the officials always used to talk about how there's no tax cut that you could give people that gives them the same kind of savings that a reduction in interest rates does. Like, there's just a massive impact on household budgets one way or another. So the prospect of interest rates rising should be something that's pretty concerning to people.
Yes.
And that's where I would go. I'm not sure I agree that you need to really, I don't know that you need to link it as much to debt, because I think there's some there are some cul-de-sacs in that argument that are going to get exposed pretty quickly. I think you want to breeze by all that stuff as proof points. You get heads nodding. But I think ultimately you got to say, look, your proof point, David, is you've answered it, I think. You got to say, look, these guys are taking us down a path that will result in higher interest rates. You've even got the government and the Bank of Canada saying they're going to tolerate higher interest rates. So that's going to happen. So that's going to happen, and then everything's going to be more expensive, and there's no plan to manage that. And the reason we've had 15, 20 years of like relative success economically is because interest rates have been low, and we need to keep them there, and we need to manage that. And I think I would just try to hammer away on that. And the example I would use wouldn't be debt. I keep going back to housing. I keep going back to you can't rent at an affordable rate. You can't buy. There's no prospect that your kid will ever be able to die. You're not going to be able to leave your kid an inheritance. You've got to give your money to your kid before you die so that they can buy a home. And the dream of home ownership is dying. I would hammer on that. And I know there are weaknesses to that argument. Economists and others will come and say, well, this is why that's not true. But that's a trap for the Liberals. So they get caught into a technocratic argument over those things, a big trap. Because then there's nothing that makes them sound more like what conservatives accuse them of, which is removed elitists who want to argue as though it's an economics TED Talk. And so I would hammer away on those things. I'd be like, the threat of interest rates rising and the inaccessibility of the number one anchor of your financial security forever, your home. You can't get that now if you're anybody that isn't already in one.
Home ownership is hard is because of basically all of the red tape there is around actually building more homes. It's it's municipal governments, it's NIMBYism, it's all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's a fantastic message, but I still think there's something to the debt. There is a reason Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, was talking about the debt yesterday. I've spoken to candidates who have been door knocking, and it's coming up at the doors. So I wouldn't ignore the debt, because obviously people are aware of it and they're worried about it. So it's not just home ownership. There is a reason why it's coming up. So I think that it would be irresponsible for the Tories not to talk about the $1 trillion net debt that the country has.
Sorry, and I do want to respond to that, because I agree with you, and I want to be precise. I would put that into my rat-a-tat-tat set of talking points about things that are fucked up and reasons that you need to get a new government. I just would be anxious about really banking on that, for fear that people will hear that you're going to become a deficit hawk, which is, I don't think, where people are at. And secondly, you got to be careful. You want to push people toward the argument that you think you have the best potential policy remedy for, that you can get through in a debate and a discussion at the doors. And I don't think it's easy to have a good answer on the debt. So but I think that home ownership, you can jerk together a policy on home ownership that, might be bullshit, but probably gets you through a conversation.
A third of Canadians think the debt is the most important challenge facing the country. A third of Canadians don't care how big the debt is. And about a third of Canadians are at a point where they think it's a serious challenge. They're not prepared to contemplate significant cuts in government spending yet to deal with it, but they wouldn't want to hear a potential government, sounding cavalier or disinterested in managing the debt. I think that's roughly how it plays in political terms. So I'm interested in something, you two. Since we last met, which was sadly 2 weeks ago, I really missed you last week, but I needed a break. But since we last met,
you needed a break from us, Scott.
From us? From us? You need a break from us?
I did.
Jesus Christ, that Jenni Byrne, she's fucking on and on.
Yeah, she is the problem. She is the problem. For sure, Scott, no doubt.
Well, I'm a breath of fresh air anytime. So,
what is your shirt today, by the way? Anyway,
Dusty Springfield, Dusty in Memphis.
I can't. Dusty in Memphis, son of a preacher man.
Fantastic. You don't have to say you love me. Just be close at hand.
Okay, that was sweet. Really.
You asked.
Okay, I'm off my game now. What was I saying? I was saying that since we last met, the Trudeau government went out to Newfoundland and Labrador and cut them a multi-billion-dollar check to cover off the cost of a terrible policy error that the government of Newfoundland had made with regard to Muskrat Falls. Then it went off to Quebec and signed a multi-billion-dollar deal for effectively nothing, because it was for childcare, but Quebec already has a childcare program, so it's not going into childcare, it's going into whatever Legault wants it to go into, and he's made it pretty clear that that's the case. I'm not saying these things are bad things to do. In fact, an asymmetric health deal is something that Paul Martin did, so I'm not saying necessarily that it's a bad thing to do. But these kinds of things used to be controversial. First of all, we're talking about real money here. It's like $6 billion in the case of Quebec and about $5 billion in the case of Newfoundland. People in Canada used to fight over these amounts of money. And the second thing is the principle behind each of them is odd, especially the case in Newfoundland. And I would imagine that there are other jurisdictions that might say, well, we made a policy error. Jason Kenney could say, well, I kind of regret investing in Keystone. Can you give me $1.5 billion to compensate Alberta for the fact that I put that money into Keystone? I mean, it's a weird principle, and it's a lot of money, and nobody seemingly gave a shit.
Well, that's because there's also no opposition. Like we haven't heard any of the parties actually come out and do any messaging on it. Kenney came out after the Quebec deal and basically said, okay, well, we want to be able to do whatever the fuck we want to do with our money, the health or the childcare money, the same as Legault. Like what's good for them is good for us. And so that's the only opposition to any of the policies that you just mentioned. It's part of the reason why no one knows about it or there's no controversy is there's no opposition to it. There's no one standing up and saying, this seems like a fucking like lunacy that what you're doing, and Canadian taxpayers are going to pay for the mistakes of past governments of Newfoundland and Labrador. There's no opposition to this, because for whatever reason, everyone's trying to go along to get along. They don't want to offend anyone leading into the election, and so that's why I think that it's not controversial, is because everyone's just shrugging and saying, let's just go with it.
But if you wanted to make the point that Trudeau doesn't know the value of money, I mean, surely you would be harping a little bit on the fact that he just traipses around the country throwing billions at things. Of course
you would.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's. I mean, if we're going to talk crass politics, I'm not sure that's the best. That's the best attack. I think I would go a little bit to where Jenni was hinting at about regional favoritism. Try to get the fairness argument going and saying, wait a second, right? I'm all for helping out Newfoundland, but how can it be that the government set aside $17 billion for energy transition, and yet Alberta has hardly seen a penny of that yet? And if you want to talk about climate change, don't we need to talk about the energy transition that's necessary? And doesn't that need to be treated as a national priority, at least as much as Muskrat Falls, for Christ's sake? I'm puzzled, frankly, that when you look at a bunch of the things that government has used the giant checkbook and the tolerance for debt in these last few months to deal with, I'm puzzled that they haven't expended more of that money to try to blunt themselves, not to win seats in Alberta. I mean, that would be nice, but just to blunt themselves against those kinds of arguments. So I don't think a bunch of that money's been deployed, and I think that it could have. I think there are legitimate policy reasons to do that. I think there's really compelling political arguments. The last thing I want to say about this is I just want to take a one pause of a moment to remind everybody that the reason it was necessary to bail out Newfoundland is because Danny Williams is the worst fucking premier that's ever existed in any province at all time. He's a shit person, a shit politician. He was awful, awful, awful. And we're not editing this out, Jill. I want to keep it. I don't like the guy. I've never liked the guy. I've been proven right. Time and history have demonstrated that my take on Danny Williams is correct. He's no goddamn good. And there will always be a giant stain over his name in the books of history.
And to that, I agree with Scott.
100% united. Curse of Politics, Herle Burly Panel, united. So let's take that segue and go right into our Hey Yous. And
Scott, do you want to go first?
Wait a second.
Oh.
Wait a second. Oh. We have a transition to the Hey You.
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Go ahead, Scott. Give us a Hey You.
I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to what I said a few minutes ago. My Hey Yous to the Prime Minister. I think they're going to call the election on Sunday. I think he's going to wander up to the microphone, and say, all right, we're having an election. And my great fear is that he's going to repeat the sort of broad, values-based, big sort of picture message that he's been using for months and months and months. That has served them well. So to be fair, I think it needs to be sharper. So my Hey You to the Prime Minister is get into it. Get into it on day one. Dictate the terms of the debate. Dictate the terms of the election. In particular, take control of this Delta variant question mark that's going to hang over the campaign now because of the timing, because we didn't get this election called in July, and say that it's part of your campaign. Say that you want to move with a national mandate. Say that you want to have Canadians vote on that. And that will inoculate you against the issue of whether you have taken this thing too lightly and that public health isn't as big a priority for you as politics. It inoculates you on that. And I think it kicks over a hornet's nest into O'Toole's political coalition. So go hard, go precise. And I would uncork that issue right away. Don't wait till Labor Day when cases are rising. Do it now.
Well,
I got to go next, Jenni, because I'm just going to echo. I got to go next because I'm just going to echo Scott. Scott took mine, which is, I'm just going to phrase it a little bit differently. To the people running the Liberal campaign, and I know that they've been sitting on the edge of their chairs waiting for my advice, Katie in particular. And here it comes. Here it comes. Win the first week. Win the first fucking week. Make sure you win the first week. I've done incumbent campaigns, and I've had a bad first week plan, and I've had a good first week plan, and I know the difference now, and it really matters. Come into this election with energy and purpose in the first week to set the terms of the election campaign. or this thing could get away from you and start to be about something altogether different than what you want it to be about. Jenni.
Well, mine's kind of a bit different. My hey you is actually to Jay Hill and the Maverick Party. They had their founding convention much later than I actually assumed they already had it this past weekend, where they came out and said that they are not going to run candidates in any ridings out west that could split the vote and ensure the NDP or the Liberals would win, which is very good. I'm very happy to hear. As a Conservative, I am very happy to hear this. But this is a protest party that's now refusing to do any form of protest. It just seems a bit strange to me.
We're an applause party.
So as happy as I am about this, to hear this, it means that it's not going to affect the outcome of my friends that are running out west for the Conservative Party. My hey you is to Jay Hill and Maverick. Like, why the fuck do you even exist then?
Pretty good question.
Excellent. It's a very, very, very good question. In this particular case, I don't want hey you to end the show. I got to ask you folks one more question. So I read Obama's autobiography, and so I know that in 2004, when he was essentially a failed local Chicago politician, he attracted into his orbit a guy named David Axelrod, who was one of the leading political consultants in the United States and had a big reputation of his own. And David Axelrod threw himself into the Barack Obama campaign, culminating in the nomination victory and then in the election victory, and then went into the White House as his senior advisor. This past weekend, Barack Obama had a birthday party to celebrate his 60th birthday. And because they were getting shit about holding a big party during COVID, they scaled back the guest list. And Jay-Z and Beyonce, who I don't think were at the meetings in 2004, kept their invitation to the party, and David Axelrod got dropped. What's the story about politics that comes from this?
It's the life hacks like us. It's the life as Michael Corleone and Jerry Butt said to me once. This is the life we choose. It's kind of what politics. What have you done for me lately? And Barack Obama does not need David Axelrod for anything, but he sure as hell likes to hang out with Jay-Z and Beyonce and John Legend and all of the celebrities.
Absolutely. Like, welcome to the reality of life. We are functions, not friends, right? We serve a function. Help us get elected, manage through. If that all goes well, everybody's happy. But don't think for one moment that if I attain a level of standing that I can hang out with Paul McCartney, that I will be choosing to hang out with you instead. Okay, that's not happening. So if you're surprised by that, and if you're injured by that, you need to go and take some time in the mirror and have an honest conversation with yourself. So.
Well, since everybody has a Netflix subscription, I'm going to make an old movie recommendation. It's a movie called No Way Out. It was, as far as I'm aware, Kevin Costner's first starring role, and it's a great Gene Hackman performance and even a great Sean Young performance. But every time I hear a story about somebody in politics like this Obama-Axelrod one, I think about the relationship between Hackman as the senator and his chief of staff. And it's one of the interesting political sidebars of that movie. So there you go. Go watch No Way Out, and you'll realize why we're all such disposable toilet brushes here in politics.
I love No Way Out.
Love No Way Out. Thank you. The first episode of Curse of Politics. Aren't you looking forward to the writ every goddamn day? Every goddamn day.
What could be better? All of us, all the time.
I know. All right. Thank you all for listening and watching.
Carpeting.
Subscribe to Curse of Politics on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you do this, on YouTube. And thank you to everybody at Air Quotes for getting this new show up and running. And a special thank you to Gordon Pinson. See you next week.